Hello, everyone. This is Rita McGrath. You probably knew that. And welcome to another edition of our Thought Sparks podcast, which are conversations I have with people who have ideas that I think could spark your thinking. And that's really the purpose behind the podcast. My guests today are the co-authors of this terrific, fascinating new book called In Praise of the Office, The Limits to Hybrid and Remote Work, which doesn't pussyfoot around in its title at all. And so my former teacher, good colleague, dear friend, Peter Cappelli, and his collaborator, Ranya Nehmeh, did I pronounce that right?
Yes.
Who is an HR goddess, as Peter likes to describe her. So we'll anoint you with that title, Ranya.
Wow.
So welcome.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Ranya, by the way, is a PhD, teaches in Vienna, and was a HR executive in various places before. Now she's trying to be a Rita.
Okay. I could probably give you tips on that if that's of interest.
Wonderful. I will definitely come back to you.
So, okay, so return to office work from home. Lately, we got work from many, right? Have you been following this trend of overemployment?
Oh,
have you heard about this?
This is people having more than one job.
More than one quote unquote full-time job, which they can get away with because they're remote. And I read that the other day, and I was like, wow, I've not heard of that before. But apparently, it's more common than we think. There's even a Reddit thread dedicated to the people who do this, and then tips and tricks. And one tip was don't work for two companies in healthcare that use the same system at the same time, because they'll only allow one instance to be in the system, which I thought a bureaucratic system designed to support HIPAA laws or something would also blot out some of these other bad practices.
Yeah, well, just to be clear for folks, that's patently illegal. So there's a common law requirement for employment called duty of loyalty, which means that you can't do that. Everybody who's doing it, if your employer could whack you if they wanted to, right? Wow. Not just fire you, right? So
anyway, so there's this whole swirl of questions about what is work, where does it get done, how does it get done, and Peter, you and I have been talking about this for some time because your previous book really tried to expose some of the earliest research, which was of any quality at all, kind of trying to get at the heart of those questions. And this is one of those issues that's very emotional for a lot of people, right? The work from home thing just took off. But I thought perhaps start with why this book, why now? And then how did we kind of get to where we are with all this?
Well, let me take a stab, and then Ranya can clean up whatever I afterwards. So I had written a book about this earlier on the very beginning of the pandemic, partly because we just didn't seem to know anything, or didn't appear that we knew anything about the remote world we were moving into. But in fact, it had been studied since the 1970s, not in a huge way, but a fair number of studies. And in those days, the situation was different. It was individual, actually kind of more like it is today. It was individuals who were choosing to work remotely, but most of their colleagues were in the office. And all that evidence basically said it was really bad for people who were the ones who were remote. Their organization commitment was lower, their job satisfaction was worse, their social isolation was greater, their promotion prospects deteriorated. I mean, everything was bad except their life outside of work, which was presumably better. I think the story now, just to back up for people a little bit, our memories are so short on this, but just to pause for a second, do you remember wiping down your groceries when you got them, picked them up, when we thought we were going to die? If you were in a city, as I kind of was for a while, and you walked down the street and somebody else was on the same side of the street, they would cross the street to get away from each other. We thought we could die, right? And so people were really grateful to have the opportunity to work remotely. Not just because you wouldn't get sick, but otherwise you wouldn't have a job, right? So people really pitched in. Employers asked employees for help. And, we kept the wheels rolling. The expectations were low, and I think we were all surprised it worked as well as it did. Now, how much of that was because people felt, like this was a crisis, we have to get through it. It's not so clear. We don't have that now. I think the issue now is that after the pandemic, the expectation was we were coming back to the office, and survey of employees, maybe a year after the pandemic, said 88% or so said they understood why we need to come back to the office. But then employers didn't say anything for the next 2 years or so.
Except for like Goldman Sachs and people like that.
Yeah. But they, more or less didn't say, okay, we're still coming back. And so now it's understandable it's a problem from the employee's perspective, because it's the new normal. We've had this for a while. What's the problem? The problem is two steps. One problem is things clearer now for employers about what has not been working so well. Not impossible, but just not so well. And a lot of that also is true for hybrid. In fact, we're mainly talking about hybrid. Almost very few companies are truly remote, and almost none went from being in the office to permanently remote. So a lot of things are just not working so well. It's all within the employer's side to try to improve them, but they haven't done it. So that's the issue now. We've been in this long enough, we can kind of tell. Now the employers are starting to see things they don't like. And so this is the reason why we're telling this story from the employer's perspective. I think we all get the employee's perspective. But there is one thing about the employee perspective is worth pointing out. And then I'll stop and turn over to Ron here for a minute. And that is the generational issue here. Everybody who is arguing about how great it is to be remote, for the most part, are experienced people who were brought up in an office context.
And who have networks.
Out office work by being with other people and being in the office. They don't need it. Right behind us is a generation that has not been in the office. And if we continue on with hybrid and remote in various ways, they will never have that experience. And it's quite a different story if you're the employer to have to worry about that next generation, and not just the people who are now senior and eventually will leave, right? Who think this is fine, what's the problem? People coming in, very different story, right? Mm-hmm.
Well, and one of the studies that you cite, which I found to be really, really interesting, was the one that was done of computer programmers before and after they went remote. Yeah. And what I found fascinating about that study was it kind of supported both sides of the argument. For the senior people, it was awesome. I was more productive. I was doing all this stuff. It was great. And yes, two thumbs up. And for the junior people, it was, well, wait a minute. Where's my feedback? Where's my mentoring? I'm not getting brought along the way that I should. And what I found fascinating was what was great for the senior people from a sheer individual point of view was probably not so great for the company. Right. From a building a sense of community, planting the seeds for the future point of view. I think the point that you just made.
Yeah, and just to highlight the part of that story is that when the senior people were together with the other folks, they were spending more time giving them feedback on their own problems. So they were helping them learn and develop and helping the organization. When they were not together, they were just doing their own individual KPIs. And that is another issue that we highlight and point out. So, sorry, Ranya, did I say everything there that you wanted to say?
No, I mean, you've covered everything, but maybe just to mention that we saw in the last years so much one-sided narrative of this topic. And that's why we also thought, to examine what are the challenges of remote and hybrid, because it was being less tackled than just the notion that remote good, office bad. So we thought we would really contribute to that, to find out about that narrative and really investigate it.
Yeah. So there is, and Rita knows this, but there's 100 years of research since the Western Electric studies in the 1930s showing that interactions matter, right? People do care about being with their peers, the social context of that. It provides opportunities for learning and just all kinds of things that we know matter. And to say, all that was wrong is such a leap of faith, right? That it's just hard to sustain.
I absolutely agree. So kind of how we got here. And I think it's useful for people because there's a whole generation of people who don't remember like when an office was a place that had physical assets that you had to be able to access to do your work. Like there was no such thing as a laptop computer. We did not have the internet. I remember my dad, he would come home from work with a briefcase full of actual papers, and like the papers would have little memos on top of them, like, and they would have a checkbox, please recirculate, maybe discarded, please return to so-and-so. I mean, physical paper moved around this plant called an office. And if I go all the way back to the Allen studies, which I think were done in the 70s, right? And what Frank Allen, I think his name was, the MIT professor, what he was interested in understanding was, how does information flow around research organizations, this particular focus. And what he found was when people were co-located more than 60 feet apart, there was just like this catastrophic decline in the flow of rich information. And we seem to have completely forgotten that.
Yes, we have. Although it's been replicated, there have been some studies now post remote work showing that people's networks have shrunk dramatically, even with the internet, right? So doesn't have to be physical so much, that they talk more to a small group of people and they talk less and less to people who are physically removed from them, in the organization chart too. Rita, I just wanted to mention for our younger listeners that the inbox used to be a physical thing. It was on a desk. It was called the inbox, and there was an outbox underneath it. An inbox where things were dropped in. And now, it's hard to believe that that's true, right? But
you're taking me back.
Yeah,
I have a plaque that used to sit on my desk at my first job. My name was Gunther then, and I've kept it just sort of out of a historical reminiscence. But I used to have a physical desk where I could be reliably found, and there used to be a phone on it. It had one of those cords, and if someone wanted to get a hold of you, they would actually call you on that device.
Yeah, and only on that device, right?
Well, and people, I've had people to say to me today, well, that's so rude. And I'm like, what do you know? Well, how do they know it's a good time? I said, they don't. This is why answering machines were invented,
It's a big change.
So we first started to have large-scale offices, and you point out in the book, you had time and motion studies trying to bring to office work the same kind of productivity improvement that we'd brought to manufacturing. Science. And that went on for a while, and then we started to see offices as places of innovation, creativity, and different things were going on. But at the same time, you had pressure on the cost of physical real estate, and so you saw the invention of cubicles first. So you eliminated offices with doors, which a lot of people didn't like at all. Then you had cubicles, or God forbid, long tables, or worst of all, hot desking, where you had to pack up your stuff at the end of every day, and who knew where you'd be the next day. And maybe walk us through some of the implications of those arrangements.
Well, just maybe a little bit more on the stories about that. There was a thing in the corporate world where people would compare their status by counting office tiles.
Oh, wow. Yes.
What office tiles meant that your ceilings were always these drop ceilings with kind of acoustical tiles that were 1 foot square, and you could count the number of tiles. And the expectation was if you got promoted, you were getting more office tiles, you're going to get a bigger office, right? There was this great experiment run by the Chiat advertising agency in New York, where for reasons of innovation and creativity, they thought, we're going to break out of the standard desk, and we're going to get rid of desks. We're going to get rid of permanent office space, and you don't have to be here. You just go wherever you feel like working. And it was a complete disaster for all kinds of reasons. Now, you might say it wouldn't have been a disaster if they had had laptops and other sorts of things, but they didn't. And the idea of sharing space didn't work well. Sharing resources didn't work well. And maybe they did have laptops then, because there were computers that you had to check out, and people started to hoard them. They didn't have file spaces, so people were using the trunk of their car for their files. All kinds of weird stuff. But you're right. There is historically, through the 1970s probably, there's a whole field of organization development, right? And that field was all about how do we make situations and contexts such that people will be more productive. And offices were designed for private conversations and trying to think about the ergonomics, but also the images. So you should look out on something green and tranquil. This wasn't a Silicon Valley thing. This started way before that, right? And then you might say the financial accounting people took over, and then it was slowly squeeze the offices down. It's been going on for 40 years, at least, right? So in that sense, this move does reflect something quite important, which people don't talk much about, and that is, in some ways, the biggest advocates of remote work were CFOs.
Mm.
And the reason, starting during the pandemic, they started cutting office space because it's a real expensive fixed cost. And we love this, send people home. It's like Uber for office work, right? They're going to pay the cost of the office.
And even better, we don't have to provide them with snacks. They buy their own toilet paper.
Right? Or gym membership or any of that stuff, right? So they were the big proponents. And one of the problems that companies had in returning to the office is once you go down that path, and most of these companies seem to have done it, to shrink office space. Once you start that, you physically can't get everybody back in the office because you don't have the space for them, right? So I think one of the reasons why there hasn't been a push sooner to bring everybody back is, frankly, the CFO resistance to it.
Just one comment, perhaps, Peter, what you mentioned before about counting the tiles. Well, it's my experience quite recently that, it depends which office you have. Is it a corner office? Because that's obviously the more, the ones that people get when they're promoted. So offices still matter. I mean, even now, this is a recent example. So,
Yeah, people still like it.
Far-fetched. It's not far-fetched. It's not like we're talking about something happening 10 years ago. This still happens now.
Yeah.
And it's very much equal to status in many organizations. The bigger the office, the size, the location.
Yeah.
I have a friend who used to joke, well, you remember him, Peter. Ian McMillan used to joke, if you wanted to know where the executives were hanging out, get out of the elevator and see if there's any art.
Oh, they hang out now. Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, and that is something that got cut, right? The art got cut. I remember some of the New York corporate C-suite level. When you got off the elevator, the thing you noticed, it was hushed.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And thick carpet and art everywhere and not a sound.
I actually had a friend whose job was curating art for corporate offices. I should look her up and find out what happened to her.
Well, so you could imagine that there was something on the cost-cutting side
probably
to that, But now the problem is, now that a lot of employers have said, okay, we want to bring people back, now they got a problem. Because now they have a fight with the CFO to say, what you mean we're going to go back and take on more office space? Then nobody's doing that. You got this problem. So one of the solutions, which from the story to all of this is about, and things got worse for employees, was to create open offices. And that means we get rid of cubicles, forget offices, and we're going to jam you together in desks. And why do we do that? It was not for collaboration, because there's less collaboration, right? Because you don't want to disturb the people around you by talking.
You come in with your headphones on.
You come in with your headphones, right? But you can jam more people into smaller space. So that's why that has happened. And people hate it, right? But that is one of the consequences now, often, of bringing people back in a smaller office space. How are you going to do it? You jam them together more. And you can see why people don't want to come back to the office. Part of it is, I'm not coming back to the same office I left. Right?
That's true.
I'm now coming back to squeezy, and even with hybrid hoteling, and it's just different and not so pleasant. Right?
Very much so. Very much so. So we get to this place where we all went home. Now people are starting to feel the effects of things are just, as Alan would have predicted, information is just not being shared the way that it once was. And now employers are trying to figure out what to do about it. And I guess part of what I really took away from the book was that if you're an individual contributor, right, a pure individual contributor, where you are you talk about patent attorneys looking at patent documents or travel agents, right? Where your work is not really affected by what anybody else does. There's no social effect to it. That being remote is fine. You can do that. But that pretty much the rest of us need a social context, a social to get stuff done. And I had to laugh when you use the example of, so you got a problem with your expense report, right? In the past, you go out and you see Tom in accounting, and Tom rolls his eyes and he goes, yeah, that's the second week, and he fixes it for you, and the whole thing takes maybe 15 minutes, right? Yeah. I myself have had this experience with my expense reports from my esteemed employer. And you work for a university, so you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So it was all messed up, and it's like 5 emails for, the first thing they said to me was, oh no, we don't have a department that does that anymore. You're on your own. So, I love the irony of saying you're going to take like the most scarce and expensive asset you have, which is your, more senior faculty. And now we're going to be sitting there figuring out what does expense code 2.07 mean for this particular $42.76 reimbursement. It's just absurd, right? Anyway.
And it might take hours to resolve. It might take hours.
Oh, and it gets nastier. It gets nastier, right? Yeah. Because you get angry with each other.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you where it finally got to. This happened to be for a client that we were servicing in California. And, I was getting this whole, oh, no, we don't have anybody to help you with that. That's all on you. And reimbursements. And I finally said, well, if that's going to be the case, I won't be able to clear my way to California to do this thing in California. And it turned out that resources could be freed under those circumstances.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Well, you think about this, too, with shared services, always been a bit of an issue, but we moved to shared services and remote. And, we were having a problem earlier, as we often do with IT issues with remote work, which is something we downplay, but it continues to happen. And, doing a podcast like we're doing now, and suddenly there's a problem, and you quickly ping your IT help, and you get in a queue. And, you basically just sending a ping, and then you get back a reply in a couple of days that says, just want to see if you're still having your problem. Well, no. That doesn't mean it was okay. But that's part of the problem. You don't get quick answers anymore. Things escalate. And a lot of information sharing just doesn't happen, but especially with new hires, right? So, we wrote this book for the employer side, and we're trying to get their attention because they have all the marbles and they're the ones that can make things happen or not. But an easy way to see this, at least when we talk to people, they might say, new hires are lost maybe 3 months longer than they were in the past. So say it's 3 months longer, right? But you've got, average job tenure, at least in the US, is 4 years. So average turnover in an organization, about 30%, but let's say it's half that for typical company of folks listening here, or 10%, right? 10% of your workforce every year is going to be new. That 10% of your workforce is going to be unproductive for 3 additional months now. Okay, what's that worth to you? That's a big number, right? And are we going to do something about it? And, right now, I think one of the things that motivated our book is this is a big problem, and you ought to get their attention and say, do something about this. There are things, the book is largely about, you could do something about this. It doesn't mean everybody's got to go back to the office, but you do have to manage differently.
Well, and there are a few companies that have committed to truly remote work. I'm thinking of Automattic would be one. But they have a system for it.
Yes,
exactly.
It's a multi-level, they train people in it. They have a system for it. They hold people accountable. And then they clear a month on people's calendars every year where they do meet in person. And they've actually tracked people by networks, like who needs to know who and who needs it. They've been incredibly intentional about it, but I would say
absolutely. It is worth noting that I don't think I've heard of a company that was regular in the office of any size and then decided to go remote. The lists I've seen, they're almost all tech companies, and they almost all started remote. But you're right; they've got rule books and things about how you have to be transparent, and everything has to be documented. And I think companies that are curious about how to make that work, and particularly their CFOs who think, why can't we just do that? Hand them the rule book and say, okay, you want to get everybody to do this? And I think the problem is they've been trying to do it without doing anything different, right?
Yeah.
Just assuming as if you're still in the office, right? So,
and that's one of the, sorry, Rita, and that's one of the main actually points of the book as well, is that you have to be very intentional when you're in a hybrid setup. You can't just cut paste the practices that you had in the office and then take them and make it work hybrid. So it has to be, you have to change that, you have to adapt.
Yeah.
So what gets lost, when we have hybrid or remote?
Well, I think hybrid in theory could be pretty good. So if you had, for example, if you moved to 4 days a week in the office, would you notice a difference? Probably not much. If you were 3 days a week, could you notice a difference? Maybe. If you did 2 days a week and you managed it carefully, could you make it work? Probably. But the big problem first is people are not showing up at all. So on anchor days, people are not there. Employers report, I think 70% of them said we've got a real problem with attendance. And when they say attendance, they mean they're not showing up on anchor days. We've got coffee badging, where people just come in, swipe their card and get a cup of coffee, and then they go home. So, you got to get people in. And in order not to completely irritate them, you've got to have their time in the office be a reason for being there, which we haven't done that either. So that's the first big problem. We got to get people physically in, or you're not going to get any of the benefits of hybrid. We're not doing that, so there's a reason why hybrid's not working. I would say my own view on this, we ask Ranya her top ones. I'd say my other top one is meetings, which are way worse. There's more of them because it's easy to make them bigger. We have meetings instead of quick conversations, and we have cameras off practices where people, are clearly not paying attention to the meeting. And I just started to hear this last week or so. People are physically not even pretending to be there. They just put their agent on to take notes.
What?
The meeting. Wow. And so if you're doing that, why are you having a meeting? And nobody even attends. What's the point of that, right?
Well, it's kind of like the students are using AI to write their papers, and now professors are using AI to grade them. And it's like, what? Why? Who keep anything, right?
I say, we'll cash your checks. We'll all go to the beach.
Exactly.
Call it a day. Yeah. So I think those are my top two. I think you have different ones, Ranya? What's your top list?
Well, I think my top list is as we see, collaboration and learning really suffers because employees are very much focused on meeting their individual KPIs and accomplishing, the required tasks at the expense of actually helping colleagues. So I think this is something really that you can also see with new hires, because they do not have this social network or a network per se at all. So that's why they also suffer, because they don't have anybody to ask for help, to guide them, to advise them. So I would say collaboration and learning, especially for new hires.
Yeah, I think that KPI thing is worth spending just an additional minute on too, because it helps explain why employees think, what's the problem? Mm-hmm. During the pandemic, we told supervisors, and they more or less did it, you got to deal with your employees one at a time and talk to them about what do we need you to do? How are we going to measure it, right? So we were driving this individual KPI thing. So that's what they focus on. And the things that are falling through the cracks are things that were never in your job description. They were things like, Peter's new in the office. Will you take him to lunch and explain what's going on? And he's got a question. He just comes over and asks you. Those things were never in KPIs. Your colleague sticks their head in the door and says, just got a problem. I just need a minute. Doing those things were never KPIs. But now that they were pushing the individual KPIs, we're highlighting your own work and all that other stuff just falls through the cracks, right?
Yeah.
And that's why do you not hear back from somebody for a couple of days? Well, they're getting their own work done, and this other stuff is just not a priority. Why are new hires lost so much? Because it's not in the KPIs of individuals. So you can see how that changes so much about the organization and things we just took for granted before.
Yeah.
And I think it really does hurt the social fabric of companies. You know, you talk about organizations that need cooperative behavior, that need widespread information sharing, that need a common culture, so that we don't sort of start from bare bones every time. Like, well, how do we do stuff around here?
Yes, right.
Yes. Otherwise, it becomes really dreadful.
And while you're on that, when the broader societal effects of this, we know the epidemic of loneliness we hear about, right?
Yeah.
And the epidemic of work stress. So it's not like being home has de-stressed the workplace.
Right.
But you don't see people. We know social networks have shrunk down a lot. We did a series of focus groups in hybrid organizations, and always a question we asked of every one of these groups was, have you met somebody through work online, you're working with them virtually, who has become a friend? And by that, I mean a friend that you engaged with other than in work. And the answer was never yes. So there may be people who didn't want to raise their hand and speak, but no one ever said yeah. And so the networks are shrinking. Of my generation, 20+% of people say they met their spouse at work. Now, I understand you don't need to do that now. There's lots more online tools for doing that stuff. But, we do have friends who are friends we met at work. And as work takes up more and more of our life, if you rule that out, and particularly for new hires who are beginning their career, social life really matters. And you say, you're not going to meet anybody at work. That shrinks their pool a lot of friends.
Absolutely. And when I think about the traditional organization, you'd bring in people in cohorts for a reason, right? I mean, when our son started working at Accenture, they had a very disciplined process of here's the cohort, here's the office you show up in. It may not be the office you eventually get assigned to, but you're going to have this cohort of people that you start with. Here's all the programs that you do, and amazing stuff like here's what you do with your computer and security. And I'll never forget one Sunday he happened to be with us, and it was the end of the month as it happened, and we were due to go out to dinner, and so we got our coats on, we're ready to go out the door. He says, "Oh, wait a minute, I need a few minutes. I'm not ready to go yet." And I'm like, "Well, what's the problem?" And he said, "My time and expense reports are due." And I looked at him and was like, "It's the big deal. Do them tomorrow." He said to me, "Mom, there could be floods. I could have bubonic plague, but time and expense reports go in on." And I thought to myself, damn, this company has done, in 2 weeks what I have not been able to accomplish in 24 years.
Yeah, right. There you go. Well, I think one of the things that has changed, a slight non sequitur, is that the consulting companies and the accounting firms are now among the best managed places. And I think the reason is because they can see the adverse consequences with new hires if they're lost, right?
Oh, interesting.
Because you think about how they make money, they're paying these folks $100 an hour, but they're billing their time at $200 an hour. So you got to get them valuable really quickly, or you're losing money, right? So they have gotten much better, and I think the rest of the business world has gotten worse, I think.
That's interesting. Well, I'm very intrigued at what Julie Sweet's doing over at Accenture. She's got 700,000 people.
Yes, they do, 700,000. Yeah, right.
And yet she's done a reorganization where she says we don't have like practices that focus on the customer's problem anymore. We've got kind of everybody working on everything, and I'm fascinated to see how that looks.
Yes.
And how that's going to work out. Really, really interesting.
It will be.
So what are some things companies can do? And then I'd love to talk about the blowback a bit that you've gotten.
Okay. Ranya, things to do?
Sure.
She wrote this part, so there we go.
Well, I think one of the things is, first off, is to really assess the real problem. Is there a problem in the organization? And there are some ways that we've listed that you can do that, is to collect data, using calendar and communication data to detect any patterns in or breakdowns. Look for an increase in post-meeting meetings, because as Peter explained, could be a red flag, because it means people are multitasking and not paying attention in the meetings as well. Something else is, some more actionable steps is to really set clear and enforceable rules. So as we said, like with Automattic and those remote companies, how they have a set of rules of how to manage meetings and who's there and clear agenda, also have these kind of enforceable rules, so you really can make kind of virtual meetings more effective. So these are just a few examples. And then, of course, which we haven't touched upon yet, is really how to revamp or maybe measure performance in a better way. Because one of the issues that we see is that sometimes you get to promote the wrong people simply because you don't see how they are managerial wise. Like, you don't see their skills as a manager, you see their skills as an individual contributor, which could be excellent, but does not mean that person could be a good manager, right? So you could end up also promoting that the wrong person as well. So you really need to kind of revamp that and make sure that it is also suitable for hybrid setups.
Absolutely. Well, I'm reminded, this isn't really directly related to hybrid or not hybrid, but some years back I was working with Fidelity Personal Investments, and they wanted to really go from a hierarchical product focused model to a much more kind of agile customer focused model. And that all sounds easy on paper, but it's completely different. And it wasn't really until people were put into leadership roles who had this kind of more what Liz Wiseman would call a multiplier perspective, right? So making other people better, making sure the groups were working well, and not sort of enjoying the fact that there was another rung on the hierarchy to be conquered. And it wasn't until those leadership decisions got made that people actually believed the change was going to be serious.
Yeah. Rita, I think it makes a great point about the change process and particularly the role of leadership. So if there's a finger you could point to about the problems, it's the leaders. And that's the reason, of course, is the leaders have all the marbles, right? The employees can't change this stuff. It has to be the leadership. And I think they have not recognized what a huge organizational change issue it would be to bring your employees back. You told them that things were kind of going well, and then you haven't told them anything for a couple of years.
Right.
In fact, you've often told people things that you're now walking back, like the Silicon Valley companies are walking back all those live anywhere stuff, and if you want that to happen, you've got to have a change management process. And it can't be just telling people we feel we work better together.
Right.
They all start with the burning platform ideas John Cotter explained decades ago now. And that is what is the reason for this? And it's got to be something you can really demonstrate with some evidence, right? So I think that we've failed in that respect. Not just to manage the change process, but to do the things like make it interesting to be back in the office and make it useful when you are in, if you're going to have anchor days, to be here rather than come in and do the same stuff you could have done at home, right?
Exactly.
That's just going to irritate people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that I think leaders face is a huge symbolic disconnect between what they're prepared to do and what they're asking their people to do. I guess an example of this, and I don't have any personal relationship with him, but the CEO of was it Chipotle or Starbucks? One of them.
He was at Chipotle, and then he went to Starbucks.
That's right. That's what it was. Those two companies were involved. That's exactly right. So when he was hired as a recruitment thing, right, the big brass making the offer said, "Oh, no worries, we'll commute you from your home in California using a private corporate jet to come to headquarters." And then he goes and tells the people, "Oh, I want everybody back in the office." Well, if you're an employee and you look at that, that's a head scratcher. It's like, it's okay for you to commute 1,000 miles a day. It's not okay for me.
And isn't the other head scratcher, how could the board and the people running that organization not know how terrible that would look? And why did they think that was not important enough to factor into the decision? mean, that is really telling. That's
Yeah.
a terrible story, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, for all I know, he's a great guy and a visionary manager and everything else, but I don't think you can run a company by remote control. I just don't think you can do that.
No.
And why start out by putting a bullet in your foot, right?
Right. Tie your hands behind your back, right?
Right.
And employees really need role models. So you cannot tell them one thing and then do something different, because they will also not trust that company anymore.
Well, something that Don Hembrick and I used to talk about a lot is the power of executive symbolism. And you think about it, everything you do has a substance of what it actually is. So what is remote work? Well, it's picking up your laptop and going somewhere. And then it's got the meaning that gets made around it. And I think a lot of what happens when you're together in an organization, there's a lot of meaning creation, which is a lot of symbolism.
Should be.
Sitting next to who in the cafeteria, who didn't show up at the thing, who contributed to the employee volunteer day, who didn't make it to the do-gooder march. All that stuff is human beings are constantly sort of sniffing each other for signals.
There's a great example from it was the president of PwC in the UK that during the pandemic, maybe right afterwards, they were remote, and he said the big thing he missed was people who would grab him in the hall and pass along a piece of information. And it's the kind of information that you would pass on is not what you would put in a memo. Right?
Yeah.
And nor is it what you could call up the assistant and say, I want to get on his calendar for 15 minutes. You're going to get on the calendar of the CEO? No, you're not, right? But a lot of really useful stuff just got passed along that way, and that all stopped.
Well, and you make a point in the book that Zoom meetings, useful and productive as they can be, all that little chit chat before the meeting, the kind of social stuff that happens after the meeting, Zoom goes on, we start, we stop, Zoom goes off, end of discussion. And certainly I notice it, the things clients or people will tell me kind of one-on-one, or, George is kind of a hardball on that issue, or somebody else likes to call himself a provocateur, don't let that throw you. That doesn't go, you're right, it doesn't go in a memo, it doesn't go in an email. You probably don't want HR dropping in on that. Anyway, it's vital information for human communication.
Yeah. And if think about a new hire, how important it is to know all that, right? So this person will bite your head off, but they don't mean it. And this person does mean it. Getting that roadmap, as you say, not written down anywhere.
No, and don't ever get in the elevator alone with, vitally important information, right?
Yes, really important, right?
So let's talk about some of the resistance that you've gotten, some of the blowback. So just for those of you who are just joining us, I'm here with Peter Cappelli and Ranya Nehmeh, talking about their terrific co-authored book in Praise of the Office, which basically says, there are limits to the benefits of hybrid and remote work that we need to be thinking about if we're thinking about how to make organizations productive and help people in them flourish.
Yeah, so I let me lay out the beginning of the blowback, and then Ranya can pick it up. So very few people have seen the book yet. It actually isn't released till the end of next month.
I've got a copy.
So we had a Harvard Business Review article, right, that came out a month or so ago, and folks may not know that HBR editors pick the titles, not us. And the title, the last title, I just was looking through our text. You could see the previous iterations, and the penultimate text, the title was why hybrid is not working well. And they cut the well off. Boom. So it says why hybrid is not working. And I think we believe almost all the blowback is the title.
They probably didn't get around to reading the whole article.
They didn't read the article, right?
No,
the article
didn't read too long.
Yeah, no, too long, right? Like undergraduates, right? We have to read the whole thing. So the article itself is much like the book, and it's mainly making the argument about what you have to do to make hybrid work well and why it's not working well. A lot of that is attendance and meetings, and then all the things we described about onboarding, all those things, right? So I think that was the blowback. That has been the blowback. It's people who, employees, for sure, who want to keep their hybrid arrangements and don't want any resistance to it. And again, we're not opposed to hybrid. We are opposed to the idea that there is nothing to in-person connections, right? And I think, the evidence, which is quite limited, about individual jobs in single companies that went to fully remote for individual contributors and that it worked fine for those people, doesn't say much of anything about what's going to happen in a typical office, right? And so we were trying to pull together evidence from all over the place, showing that there are some real consequences to this. So I don't think we don't think the book is, of course we wouldn't, is particularly biased one way or the other, but we do understand that it threatens people who love what they've got and are afraid that it might be taken away, and so don't want anything said that might be used by people who want to take it away.
I think also the title of the book is probably more controversial than the actual what we've written in it, because it's very balanced. But the title, I think, throws people, because they assume that we are saying everybody come back to the office.
Right.
Yeah, which is not what we say. So there is, Rita, you probably appreciate this kind of stakeholder view of this. The quirky thing, it just struck me the other day about this, is the strange kind of bedfellows on either side. So on the side of pro-remote, leading the pack are CFOs, which you never would have thought, right?
That is interesting.
They're not pro-employee, right? And of course, employees who are experienced, not the new hires, but those who are experienced, right? Those are leading the pack. On the return to the office or be in the office side, you've got one group of business people on the other side of the CFOs, and they're a group that feels you have to watch people or they're going to goof off, right? They're very conservative, theory X sort of people, right? But then there's also people in the field of management who know that human interaction matters, which is really kind of the story we're making, right? So you've got, a group that's kind of progressive, you might think of in pro-employee on both sides of the issue. And you've got a group that is pro-employer in business, serious, hardcore business, also on both sides of the issue. And so the push and pull that we're seeing now, I think, is partly driven by the employees now having a little less power because the labor market has slacked a bit, but also the pushback on that is the CFO side that's saying, we don't want you to have to add office space to bring these people back, So it is a weird kind of political story, of stakeholders shifting their positions a little bit that's causing us to go from one direction to the other a little bit, right?
Interesting.
And
Well,
sorry,
go ahead.
And also a very touchy topic, because again, people think that this is about them. It becomes something that personal. When you have, very personal, like when nobody wants it to be taken away from them. And that's why it's really important to separate beliefs from the data. So.
And also, the idea that this does not mean that you can't have hybrid. It does mean that companies, employers have to take it more seriously, and they can't manage as if you were still in the office, which is really what is happening, right? I think one other quick part of that is mistake companies have made is they effectively just decentralized everything down to the local level. So they said, let local managers make the decisions about anchor days and when you have to be in and meetings and, norms on Zoom calls. What that does, though, when you push it down to the team level, it makes the local supervisor the bad guy. And they look around and nobody else is enforcing these rules. And you try to enforce them, employees go, hey, boss, everybody else gets to come in on the day they want. They get no benefits as supervisor for being tough, and they get a lot of problems. So they all fold, right? And that's kind of what's happened. I'm sure people at the top kind of think that people are showing up on or were thinking that people were largely following the rules. Part of what has also happened, though, that's changed the dynamics, you see this with Jamie Dimon in particular, right, is that they have started to realize that people are actually not there on these anchor days, and they're irritated about it, and, understandably. But they should also ask, why is it that we have this rule that nobody's been following? How did that happen, right? How'd that happen?
Well, and this kind of mass resistance. And I think it's interesting the way that it's being framed, right? Which is you're losing a privilege. You're losing, rather than here's this opportunity to do great stuff with people that you love. And I think two examples that come to my mind of companies that to me have kind of gotten it right would be Netflix. And Reed Hastings was very famous for saying, "Oh, I can't wait till we can all be back in the office." And people sort of had the blowback with him, and they said, "Oh, what are you, some kind of antediluvian?" He said, "No, Netflix from its founding has always said, wherever you do your best work." But what most of our really creative people found is they do their best work when they're together, so they do that naturally. So I can't wait till we can get back to doing that. So I thought that was so interesting. And then the other one that's fascinating is a South Korean financial tech startup called Toss. And they're like a very devolved organization. They have no higher and lower levels of hierarchy. They have what they call directly responsible individuals, and they have kind of circles of these people. And during the pandemic, the Korean government, like governments all over the world, said, shut offices down, don't bring people together, no public gatherings, la 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 la. And so there was a whole group of these TOS employees who were like, well, if we can't meet in the office, we'll exercise safety precautions, and we'll just hire hotel rooms and we'll meet there.
Wow.
Oh, wow. Okay.
When we found out about it, they were like, well, look, if we can't stop you from meeting, unlock the doors and don't tell the government, I guess. But what struck me about that story was these folks were so clear that the work they were trying to get accomplished could only be done when they were physically together, that they would actually defy that order to stay home in order to make that happen. And I don't think very many companies have that level of passion around that.
Yeah. Although, it is interesting, though. So Ranya is based in Vienna, although is in Lebanon at the moment. But around you, everybody's sort of back to the office, right? So here's a hard question. I should have preempted on this one earlier. Why do you think that is? Why do you think in the EU generally people are largely back to the office? And I would have thought, workers have power in the EU. They'll stay home. They'll make this happen. But do you have a sense of why everybody went back to the office here?
I mean, I think in the UK it's a bit different because
UK is a little different.
Yeah, but otherwise, I just think employees just don't have that much power. Actually, I think just the employers said they need them back, and here they are. They came back. I don't think it's
But they came back pretty early, I guess. They didn't. There wasn't this long
back
period.
pretty early, no, and that's why maybe because they didn't really have that time, like in a lot of American companies, which is like still 5 years on, people have moved location, they don't live anywhere close to the office. I don't think much of this happened in the EU. So
one of the things I discovered was a survey done a year after the pandemic, where 80+% of employees said they understood the reason for having to come back to the office, and if they had done it then, probably could have gotten away with it. You wait a few years, it's the new normal. And as Ranya says, a lot of people have invested in the arretrofits.
Oh, yeah.
And now you're going to yank it out from under them and not explain why.
How many people do you know bought houses, retrofitted, the backyard shed is now a home office. I mean, people have truly, people took it seriously when they heard this.
And just to be... Go ahead, Brandon.
Oh, sorry. Just one more thing is that there was a study actually from Gallup from 2023, which shared that 12% of employees actually said that hybrid was not working properly in their organizations. So this is really, this is a huge number, and it does show, yes, employees do like hybrid. It is their preferred option, but they do recognize that there are issues with it.
So I think that there are some things that we are saying in the book that will bite on some employees, right? And one is the idea that you could relocate yourself to Aspen, and your company is going to be in Philadelphia, and you have anchor days you got to show up on. That is a real problem for those folks. If you're not an individual contributor, though, I think you really have to say, well, this just hard for this to work for the organization. The other thing where it does bite is in those companies that had anchor days, but they didn't enforce the days. So, you could go to your boss and say, hey, boss, I know we got to be in 2 days a week, but how about I come in on Monday because my kid's got this play date on Tuesday and, it would really mess them up. And so you can't do that, right? If you have anchor days, the idea is we have to be in on anchor days. The reason you don't have to be in 3 days a week is because you are there together for 2 days, right? So that will bite, right? That is true. But I think if you don't have those things, if you say you can move away and never come in, you're going to lose these benefits of interaction. Maybe that is the kind of thing that you can do for people pre-retirement. I think, though, just a piece of career advice for people, if you're offered the opportunity to be permanently remote, I would think twice about taking it, because your current boss may say that, your new boss may not. And some CFO may say, why is Peter a permanently remote worker? You mean he's never here? Why is he an employee at all? Let's make him a contractor. And I'm surprised that hasn't happened more.
I think it actually has happened secretly.
Yeah.
And, Peter, in our last conversation, we were talking about this sort of invisible workforce of contractors. Some of whom are employees of staffing agencies, but a lot of whom are just independent people. And it's an army.
Yeah, it is a big group. That's true.
It
is a big group. Yeah, I wonder how many of the people who did not think that was going to happen, they moved to Aspen, and then oops, they discovered they became a contractor.
Oh, I know so many people that's happened to.
Good. Oh, that's good. Good to know. That's it. But that's a huge bet, boy.
Yeah.
You're trusting your employer on that one. And it's not that the person telling you isn't sincere; they just don't have the power to.
Not over the long term.
Yeah.
But also, I think what people don't understand is, yes, there's a benefit to the company for you being in the office, but I think people completely underestimate the benefit you get from being in that environment. And I looked at some of our younger folks who've never had the experience of, the alarm clock goes at such and such a time, you get up, you do whatever you do in the morning, you take a shower, you get out the door, you leave enough time that the subway doesn't make you late, and whatever it is, and then you turn up at a specific place, and there are going to be people who help you, learn what the office is and build that discipline. And one of the things I would observe is, and this is not a sort of, the younger generation's lazy or whatever. I don't think they are. I just don't think they've gotten the opportunity to get.
It's always this way, right? Yeah, it's always.
What do you need to get? What do you need to get done? And there's a need for a lot of support there. And it does concern me. We've got this whole churn right now about Generation Z, and they're either job hugging or they're job ghosting, or they're not taking jobs. And in a way, this whole generation got caught in this madness that we had when all these platform companies were subsidizing both sides of the platform. So you took your Uber rides and you had your coffee and you did all this stuff, and it was all subsidized by crazy venture capital money. And now that's kind of drying up, and these people are going, wait, it's going to cost me $20 to get across town.
No, that is a good point. And this I have been, as Ranya knows, because she has a book about this. I was never a believer in these generational differences. And there's pretty good evidence in the US that there was not true. But what is happening now to the current generation, it's not that their heads were wired different, but their world is really different. Stepping into remote work, having never had a real job before, is quite different than having worked for 30 years in an office and now being remote. Right. Stepping into a context where ChatGPT writes all your reports is very different from being somebody who knows how to write, and you've been writing for 30 years and know how to think, right? And being able to use it, right? It's a really different experience for them.
Just for fun, I had one of the other AIs, I had it generate questions for my podcast. And there was nothing wrong with them, but they were really boring.
Boring, yeah. Right. You've probably been seeing these things too, that in the discussions with ChatGPT and the other large language models, they assume everything you tell them is true. So there's something in the New York Times today about writing to ChatGPT and asking ChatGPT to apologize for the date they set up with them that turned out to be an octopus rather than a person. And then it apologizes. Gee, I'm really sorry that happened. And, so It's weird. It can still give you really weird stuff.
We're heading in a weird way, really.
In a weird way, yeah.
Well, anyway, the time has just flown. I want to be respectful of your time. So the book, again, is by Peter Cappelli and Ranya Nehmeh, and it is called In Praise of the Office. And it really is a bit of a counterweight to the emotional enthusiasm we've had for, wow, we can all work from home and nothing's going to change. So where can people go to learn more? I presume you have the book, obviously, is going to be out soon.
Well, there's the Harvard Business Review article, which is out last month, I think. So it's the current issue, maybe still. And then this book comes out, available at better bookstores everywhere. I think Amazon in particular is the place to order it, and you'll get it in a few weeks.
Yeah, and I would add also, in the book is actually a change, you call it the BOLD process, the BOLD bond framework.
Bond framework.
Which is sort of, okay, we really screwed up. How are we going to get the changes needed to get sort of back to some kind of productive life at work? And some, I thought it was very useful, some tips on kind of things to think about as you try to bring your employee population with you. By the way, I do think there's also a bifurcation among employees. Like I know some that are just, oh, I want to be in the office. You're in a New York apartment with 3 roommates, and and there's just no place to be, and everybody sees your bed, when you're typing. I mean, a nice office could be very pleasant. Right?
Yeah. Well, you saw, just the things in the news. The new JPMorgan building, which is opening in New York, is all about collective space for collective activities. Nice. So they have real restaurant space where you can sit down and eat. Wow. They have a pub that they've created, which is something that's after work kind of thing. You hang out and talk to your peers and stuff. So they're making a big investment in things which appear to be fostering collaboration. So, it can happen.
That's interesting. And Jamie Dimon isn't going to invest in anything he doesn't think is going to have an ROI. Well, thank both of you so much. It's been a real pleasure, and I really enjoyed the book, and I'm looking forward to the debate that will surely ensue when it comes out.
Good.
Looking forward. Thank you.
Very nice.